Louisiana lawmakers wait to see if Governor Edwards will call them into a special session on the state's congressional district's map, or if the session will happen early next year. Sabrina Wilson reports.
Based on its population, Louisiana has 6 representatives in the U.S. House, but the fight continues over whether 2 of the 6 congressional districts should be majority African American. Currently, only 1 is. The Fifth Circuit Federal Appeals Court in New Orleans is giving the Louisiana legislature until January 15th to pass a new congressional map for the state. This follows a ruling last year by federal judge Shelley Dick that the current map diluted the power of the state's African-American voters. State Representative Matthew Willard is a Democrat from New Orleans.
It's certainly positive news. The Fifth Circuit basically upheld the ruling by Judge Dick that the map that the Louisiana legislature passed regarding the congressional redistricting was out of compliance with Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act.
Republican State Senator Cameron Henry of Metairie.
Well, we believed that we had drawn the right maps, and that we were comfortable at the time. Obviously, the Fifth Circuit does not agree with us, so they want us to go back and draw some new maps, which I don't believe the legislature is going to object to doing.
5 of the state's 6 congressional seats are currently occupied by Republicans. Governor John Bel Edwards, a Democrat, says a second black majority district is warranted, but he leaves office on January 8th when Republican Jeff Landry is sworn in as governor. A spokesman for Edwards says Edwards can call a special legislative session during his remaining time in office, but it hasn't been decided whether that's the best course of action, and discussions are ongoing.
He's weighing a decision of, does he want to convene a special and bring the same legislature back in that defied the court's order before? Or does he want to leave it up to incoming Governor-elect Jeff Landry and the new legislature?
Landry is willing to call a special session after taking office, but that wouldn't give lawmakers enough time to meet the appeals court deadline for passing a new map.
I believe we have a little bit of some time constraints that are put on us by the court. That might make it difficult for us to meet the January 15th deadline.
If the Louisiana legislature doesn't pass a new congressional map by mid-January, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals says the federal district court in Baton Rouge should hold a trial and come up with a plan for the 2024 elections.
Whether you're talking about the current legislature or the incoming legislature, I'm not too optimistic on either side that the legislature will put forth a map that will include 2 majority-minority congressional districts.
We understand that it's really based on the percentages now. That's what the court is focused on. We know we have to draw 2 minority districts, which we will do.
The Fifth Circuit's ruling says the district court will have discretion to grant limited additional time to lawmakers if requested. Senator Cameron Henry, who is expected to become state Senate president, thinks if the court provides them a little more time, they could have it done by February 5th.